Teddy Host, thank you for coming on to Talk Beliefs once again. You grew up, of course, as a Moonie in the Unification Church, and now you're speaking out and have appeared on A&E's recent Cults and Extreme Beliefs docuseries, and have been on this channel, of course, as we said, twice before. But today we're going to tackle cults in general. So this is something you have an interest in, isn't that right?
About 10 years ago, I just kind of, as an artist and writer, I just, you hear that saying, write what you know, right? So I just kind of fell on this. I can talk more about that later as we go on. But yeah, so like for about the last 10 years or so, I've been like looking back at this, just observing the whole landscape of groups like it and everything like that. So
our last interviews got quite a few disparaging comments from members of the Unification Church, but I guess you kind of expected that, right?
I mean, I get it. Like, I understand. It's a choice that a lot of these people made, and I was born into it, so I never chose it. So, I can respect that difference. Whenever anyone speaks out about some kind of group like this, sometimes you get those comments that it's like, why are you being negative? Or like, hey, get over it. Like, I'm over it. I don't know why you're still dwelling on the past. The reason I speak out about it is because I see these patterns in politics, in just in everyday people. There's still a lot of groups out there that are, that really don't allow much independent thought. And, I'll probably get a backlash for even saying that. People are probably going to be like, oh, I got to speak my mind a lot. And yeah, some people even said like, hey, Reverend Moon said you can come and go as you please. But I think there's a lot of nuanced pressures to stay in, that aren't really spoken about anyway. And also, this is my experience. This was in my time. I was a kid in the 80s, and, I saw in the news, on TV, and like in comedy programs and stuff that people were, targeting the Moonies and stuff. And it was more intense back then. And in the 70s, even more intense. Things might have changed these days, but anyway, to respond to the whole, like, this is all so negative and everything. It's, it's just like, the more like, just, well, before you call it negative, like, research some things outside of the church, like research other groups like it. And then, if you want to talk about, oh, we're not a cult, or, you don't know what you're talking about, then research what I've researched and read the books I've read and see if those things line up, so. That's
I know that if I do an interview with somebody who's an ex-Mormon or an ex-JW, you will find the exact same type of comments afterwards. Exactly what they said to you is like, why are you trying to tear down the church? Why do you care, about these other people's beliefs? Why don't you leave them alone? Go get a life. It's always that kind of thing. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and I think the biggest indicator of a problem is just, well, like, I'm one of the older second generation, I think, overall of the entire church. There's ones who are older than me, and they're like late 40s now, but those are like the oldest. But I think the biggest indicator is like a lot of our parents are just financially, they don't have a retirement plan. Like, we're their retirement plan. So if you want to stay in the church, I guess that's your choice, but get, like, wise up to financial savvy, build a savings. If you put your money into something, know where it's going, and know that there's going to be some left for you. Just invest wisely. That's like just one thing I really want to caution people about. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're not doing this to make fun of or tear down anyone's beliefs or ruin anyone's lives. It's because you and I both, we can see that it causes harm and perhaps others can't. And it's like a warning, really, isn't it?
Everyone's entitled to their choice. I can't speak for your choices or experiences. I will say that just from what I've observed, there's just a lot of known patterns. Like these, the research is there that like these patterns lead to these results. Like, the research is out there. This has been done before. That was the biggest thing for me. Like, when I was researching this, I was like, oh, that group does that too. That group says that too. That group, So I was like, oh, we're not special, basically. And that's a very revealing moment. And it's also very empowering. And, self-empowerment is something that was really batted down in the church. It was like, no, we got to sacrifice for others. We got to live for the sake of others is the slogan, which is, a very altruistic thing. But at the same time, the people on top are like this multi-millionaire family who I live near, and I saw how they were, there's that book In the Shadow of the Moons, which talks about, just one of the most heinous members of that family, and just, the effect of this toxic power on that family. And so, like, when you have a bunch of people living for the sake of others, and then the family on top just like reaping it in, I mean, you have to stop like listening to what they say and start observing how they really are. So,
right. Well, before we make a start, people might not know that you are an artist and an animator and have just released a comic book about growing up Moonie, haven't you?
Yeah. I have a friend who he's one of the staff members of the Nib, which is it's kind of similar to like a Charlie Hebdo of America. It's kind of a collective of cartoonists, like basically a publisher of cartoonists who they take like stories from real life or like satire or like current events and just like make comics about it. I have a friend named Andy Warner who's a very established cartoonist, and he knew about my past and everything. I talked to him about it once. He lives in San Francisco also, so they were doing a print edition on family. So I right away he thought of me, and he's like, oh, I know a guy who's got an interesting past, so
oh yeah,
who does comics. And so he just reached out to me, and so I did a comic about growing up in the church and just kind of a glimpse of what that's like. And basically what I wanted to emphasize in it was that Reverend Moon gave a direction for parents to separate from kids. And that is a known pattern in religious cults, or if you want to call them that, or new religious movements or whatever, high demand groups. A lot of times the leaders of these groups will, kind of disempower families, or kind of any kind of alliance or unit that is, outside of his jurisdiction, his or her, and basically can threaten to, just have their own kind of, I guess, what do you call it? Like collective of power that could question them. He's going to break up, so that's part of that. But also just that it's that live for the sake of others. It's like public mission over private needs, put my needs as a leader before your needs, like as a family. And that's kind of what I was trying to say in that. But yeah, you could see it online. It's thenib.com/moon-child. So it's called Moonchild. So it's just like a 12-panel comic. Gives you a glimpse of all that. So yeah.
So if anyone wants to go there, we will put a clickable link in the description below, and people can go straight to it.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that.
No problem. So in addition to processing your own experience, what drove you to research the topic of cults in general?
So I had lived in New York through my 20s, and then I moved to San Francisco. I guess I kind of wanted to be in my own space, like kind of find my voice or whatever, just be a big fish in a smaller pond, in this city, as opposed to New York, where it's just like millions of people. So anyway, so I was just I had moved in with some roommates, ready to kind of do my thing as an artist or writer. I always need, like, for the life I've chose, like, I always need to be working on something personal. So that's kind of my thing, right? Like whether it's an art piece or piece of writing or film or animation, whatever. So I was like, okay, what's my next thing? And I like stand-up comedy a lot. I grew up like my earliest years in New York, and I was around a lot of comedy and stuff. So I was just like listening to this like iTunes station at the time in 2009, of just playing like these clips of all these different stand-up comedians. It's just kind of a constant stream of that. And one of the comedians, Christopher Titus, he came up, and I can't believe they put this in just this random thing of stand-up clips, but he brought something very vulnerable to the stage. He talked about his parents' death, and his joke was the way he found out his dad died was that a police officer called him and said, your dad died in a car accident. And then his punchline was, my first question was, how's the car? So like, I was like, wow, that kind of blew me away. I was like, if this guy can bring like that level of vulnerability to the stage, like what's my deepest, darkest secret? And, that was pretty easy. Like I could pretty quickly be like, oh, of course. Like, so from that point, I just started to, delve into it, started talking to like former members. Well, at first I wanted to tell my story from like my point of view, and living in New York, it was pretty prosperous, the church, for what it was. Of course, it was very secluded, and it was like, only trust us, don't trust the outside world. But within those bounds, we had like nice properties and everything like that. So growing up, like, I mean, you don't have any other childhood to compare it to, really, because like I was never outside the church. So I wanted to talk about it in a way that was like, okay, people call us a cult and stuff like that, but it wasn't actually so bad in these ways and stuff. But the more I looked into it, like it only took a few weeks for me to like just join like ex-Moonie discussion groups online. I'm like, oh, I'm in X. Like, this is really genuinely messed up. Books like In the Shadow of the Moons, and there's another book called Change of Blood Lineage and Ritual Sex in the Unification Church. I mentioned these in our first interview, but basically, yeah, I just, you dig a little bit. It doesn't take long to like realize that there are some very unethical things that happen at the top of the chain. So,
from what you've researched, what would you say are the differences between a religion and a cult? Because some people will just say there is no difference.
So Robert J. Lifton, who is, basically one of the most respected researchers in cults and like thought reform, he wrote a book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, which I read, and it's a pretty heavy read, but it tells you a lot about, I guess, just quote unquote brainwashing, what he calls thought reform. So the first one is milieu control, and that's where you pull someone out of their environment or away from like other people who can put in their perspective to counter whatever the group is teaching. For the Unification Church, that they brought people, usually from college campuses to like a culture night. They had usually like a center near the campus, and they would basically build a trust with these people until they could bring them to like a retreat center, like in the woods, and teach them about their philosophy for several days, like a week, or I'm not sure how long these workshops were, but they around that time. And then by the end of those teachings or those retreats, they'd say, and the Messiah is Sun Myung Moon, and that was the big selling point. And from there, some of these people would just end up in a van for years, just selling products door to door, thinking they're saving the world. That's milieu control, just pulling them away, to these retreat centers. And if they brought a pair of friends, for example, they would separate them into like different rooms so they couldn't talk to each other, so there'd be like no resistance, or no questioning. So yeah,
that makes me think how familiar that sounds. Even if you've seen these things in front of churches, Christian churches, the Alpha course, where you're supposed to learn more about Jesus. They actually a weekly course. I've done a few of them actually, and they end up taking them on a retreat somewhere far away as possible, and then they hit them with the speaking in tongues.
Oh wow!
Which they don't tell you is coming. So that's very familiar in that sense, even in terms of Christian, proselytizing.
Yeah, and I worked in marketing for a while as a designer, and it's like that's how you sell something. If something already kind of has like negative stigmas to it, you don't tell people what it is until the very end. So it's basic marketing. It's like except a lot more extreme, and basically trying to sell an entire lifestyle to someone. So but there you go. There's a known pattern, like right there as an example. Another one is mystical manipulation, where the leader will set up miracles. For example, Jim Jones, he said that he could heal people. I think there was one time where there was someone who had cancer or some kind of like fatal illness, and he had, was it like a cow's heart or a dog's heart that he pulled out some animal's organ, like he pretended to pull it out of this guy. It's like, see, I've got the tumor. So that's a pattern that happens quite a bit. I don't know the church's version of that, or if they even did that. I mean, it's not like all 8 of these apply to every group like this, but some of them here and there. So the next one is demand for purity, which is very much has to do with the church. I mean, purity was, of course, no premarital sex, and I don't like that term, premarital sex. It's like marriage is something that was invented by like the government, or it's like this certificate that you get right when you're in a committed relationship.
Yeah. I mean, sex came first, and marriage came a long time after.
Pretty much. So anyway, like a demand for purity is so as I said in one of our previous interviews, original sin came from Adam and Eve, and then the world became evil from there because they sinned in the Garden of Eden. In the Unification Church, we said that was premarital sex. So they were cast out of the Garden of Eden. So us, as second generation, being born into the church, we were said to have been cleansed of this original sin. So that meant that if we had sex with anyone outside of the church or outside of that, being born into the church, then we would basically be back to having original sin. So that's what they used to like keep us, sexually in line, which was, it's not fun. And, a lot of people, that's how they end up going to the matching, or we have, arranged marriages. Yeah, it's a very effective way, I think, to like keep people going towards that. But anyway, that's why I talk about this kind of stuff too.
If you can control the sexual urge, you really got a control over people.
But then the backlash is pretty strong too, as seen recently in the Catholic Church, unfortunately. And anyway, you can't stop one of the strongest forces on earth. So anyway, another one is confession. There's not really, in any kind of cultic groups, there's not a whole lot of precedence in having individual thoughts or being an independent person. So we always had this thing where it's like, report to your leader or report this person or that person. Again, to use Jim Jones, like he had, children report their parents, like if they were out of line. There was a lot of basically like you're encouraged like not to keep any secrets, and you have to like, tell your central figure, as they were called. So
I hear about a lot of that in the Jehovah's Witnesses as well. It's probably in every cult or semi-cult.
Yeah.
Snitching.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, we're on number 5 now. Sacred science is another one. Basically just that the philosophy is superior to any scientific research out there, or the doctrine is superior. Loading the language, that's where like a lot of kind of these groups have their own like slang or their own kind of terms for things. Like in the Unification Church, it was like we had a term heartistic. I don't know. Apparently that's not a word. Some of my brother used it the other day and I was like, oh God. But there's like, it's almost like hip hop where it's like, yo, chill, hey, be like, it's like,
oh yeah, Scientology's the worst.
Oh yeah, right, like Thetan. Yeah, going clear and everything, right? Yeah.
Precip Person, and there's just so much of it. So you get to a point where it doesn't even sound like they're speaking English anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And that's like, it's basically branding a whole subculture. Yeah. So if you want to simplify it a little. And then there's doctrine over person, where basically the doctrine is more valid than anyone's individual experience. So that was bopped over the head of a lot of members too. and then dispensing of existence, which is basically like anyone not in the church just doesn't matter. And if someone like left the church, then you just like forget about them, like they don't matter anymore. I remember when I was younger, you know, we had our like Sunday services and all the youth group got together, and one of the older ones talked about I think his cousin who was also in the church. Like, you know, he's like, one time he gave me a call and like I heard a girl behind him, like he had a girlfriend or something, and I was just like, and we were all like devastated, like, you know, because like he had this relationship that wasn't in the church. And yeah, it was things like that. They said like, don't fall, because it's like the fall of man started the you know, original sin. So they would always be like, don't fall, which means don't have sex.
Again, that reminds me of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I think the number one thing which gets them disfellowshipped, which means kicked out, is if they have a relationship or sex with somebody who's not a Jehovah's Witness.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. There you go. So yeah, that's 8 criteria for thought reform. I just think it's a very awesome, like, comprehensive list of, you know, watch out for these things. So yeah.
Just after leaving a cult, what kind of withdrawal experiences might someone go through? I mean, did you have any? And if so, can you highlight some of them?
My case, I think, is kind of unique because my parents actually, when I was 18, I came back from, you know, there's like this 1-year program called STF, Special Task Force. I don't know, pretty arbitrary name, but it's almost like the Mormon, you know, 2-year after you graduate from high school mission thing. It's not mandatory, which, you know, I'll give the church credit for that. But, you know, I chose to do it. I was like, do I really believe in this stuff? I want to be on the front lines of the church and really just like, you know, get this monkey off my back, if anything. So, yeah, I had just done that. I came back, and I think my parents saw that I became pretty indoctrinated as a result. I was very like, came back almost like a fiery church member, and you know, they felt the need to have to say something. That, you know, our family was kind of fading out of the church slowly through my teens, but then they saw that I was like, all of a sudden. So they were like, look, you know, we don't believe in this stuff. Or not, we don't believe in this stuff, but they're like, you don't have to go to the arranged marriage, which is the whole point of the church, is like, you know, prolong or keep this like pure blood lineage going.
It proves you're officially a Moonie.
Yeah, basically, yeah, and just like, you know, for generations to come. And I'm sure thousands of groups have said the same thing. And I think I did say this once in a former interview, but I remember my sister and I had both done this program out of our family. My younger brother did it too, but he bailed out. He was already kind of smart enough to like get out of it earlier. But, you know, we were like, what are we going to do? We have to save our parents. And, you know, basically like cognitive dissonance, like just suddenly you enter this abyss of like, I don't know what I believe anymore. Everything I based, you know, my beliefs on is gone or confusing, or, you know, what's right, what's wrong, what's up, what's down. So there was that, but also, and it took me years to kind of come to this, but, you know, there's like a grieving, you know, that I went through of, you know, here I was in this like really kind of utopian community, and just there was automatic trust with everyone. And we were there for each other because the outside world was, you know, not to be trusted. It's interesting. I was talking with my brother the other day, and we talked about how like it kind of came to me like, you know, when our parents left the church, I think right after you think, okay, we're not part of this anymore. I have to be like outside people. Like I have to go out and have opinions about this or that, or it's almost like a superficial like persona you take on. You're like, well, I got to fill this like void, like, you know, with something. So you just kind of pull from, you know, I would just try to act like people on TV, or like be like quick-witted, and I don't know.
Making up for lost time, faking it till you make it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. So there was that. But so that's a good thing to realize, because I don't want to see it as black and white. I mean, ever since maybe my teens, I was like, I can't live with this split, like where I just make an exception for certain people to like throw all my trust in, and everyone else like doesn't matter as much. The whole dispensing of existence thing. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, to go back to the grieving thing, like in Yanya Lalich's book, Take Back Your Life, Yanya Lalich and Madeline Tobias, she puts a section about that, and yeah, that really hit home for me. And I think that's one part that a lot of people who leave like cultic groups don't maybe bring up enough, is like you miss it. I mean, I grew up in this like, again, utopian community, well funded by, off the backs of people who just live to fundraise for this church. And, but yeah, that was my childhood. That was where my childhood roots kind of fed from. And suddenly you realize that it's not okay. And, it doesn't mean that I don't have those memories still and I don't cherish them, but it means that like I can never go back and feel as okay as I once did. So it's like growing up on like a certain kind of drug, and then that's all the only life and then suddenly you're out of it and you have to just live like everyone else, and it's sobering. Like things don't come automatically. You kind of have to put in certain behaviors or you have to claim certain things and choices, and you have to hold yourself up in ways you didn't before, that you just relied on the church for before, like relationships and opinions, and like just you have to be financially savvy, make your own financial decisions, whereas the church took care of you, by giving you a house, a job, a community, if you gave your money and time to it. So
yeah, you might come out of a cult completely broke.
Yeah. And with those thought patterns, and that's why a lot of people join like multi-level marketing after leaving a group like that. I know my parents hopped around to a bunch of different ones. Yeah, you just
kind of what they knew.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. You look for that prosperity outside of yourself. But over the years, of course the Moonies like held us back from developing that part. But over the years they got smarter about their investments. It took longer, but because for obvious reasons. But yeah, we all kind of learn the hard way, but we learn eventually to survive. So yeah.
Okay, Teddy, another fascinating interview. So thanks once again. And as before, we'll leave links for you and your work in the description below. Teddy, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, say if they are in the Moonies or another cult, and perhaps they don't know how, or if they should leave, would you be willing to communicate with them?
Yeah, you can write to my, I have an email on my website, teddyhose.com. Just write to teddyhoseworks@gmail.com. Yeah, that's probably the best way to reach me. So I really like to talk about this stuff with people, because we were supposed to keep everything a secret, as kids. And when I posted my comic, I captioned it with that. I was like, we were supposed to keep all the associations and motivations of the church a secret, but now we're all adults. So, and when you have to protect those secrets, you're basically protecting the people who tell you what to do. And that's a crime. That's a crime against humanity to do that to a child. So that's why I speak out against this stuff. So, yeah.
Great. Well, all I have left to say is, Teddy, thank you very much indeed. And hopefully we'll catch up with you later on in the year.
Yeah, totally. I always appreciate this. It's always great to talk about. So thanks for doing this, Mark.
No problem, Teddy.